"Did you hear we won $10 million?" I said it casually, like I was talking about the weather, but I watched her closely, my daughter-in-law Ashley, who hadn't called me in over 2 years, and in that single second, something shifted in her eyes, something sharp, something calculating, and that was the moment I knew we had made the right decision. Because for 2 years, the phone had stayed silent. Birthdays passed like any other Tuesday. Christmas dinners were just me and Robert sitting across from each other at a table meant for 6. The extra plates still in the cabinet, untouched, collecting dust. I used to set them out anyway, just in case, just in hope. But hope gets quieter with time. It learns not to expect too much, so eventually, I stopped setting the table for anyone but us, stopped checking my phone every few minutes, stopped pretending that maybe this year would be different. Robert noticed it before I did. The way I'd glance at the door every time a car slowed down outside. The way I'd keep my ringer on, high even at night, as if a missed call might cost me something I couldn't get back. And one evening, as we sat in the living room with the TV on, but neither of us really watching, he said, "What if we gave them a reason to come back?" And I remember looking at him, not understanding at first, because in my world, family didn't need reasons. They just came, they stayed, they cared. But his world had shifted too, just like mine. And he explained it simply, quietly, like he was suggesting we change brands of coffee. What if we told them we won the lottery? I almost laughed, because it sounded ridiculous, like something out of a bad movie. But then I thought about the last time David called, or rather, the last time he didn't. My 70th birthday. I sat by the window until the sun went down, waiting for a call that never came. And something inside me hardened after that. Not anger. Not exactly. Just a quiet understanding that whatever we had once been to them, it wasn't enough anymore. So I nodded, and we made the call the next morning, kept it simple, no details, just enough to plant the idea, and within hours, my phone lit up like it hadn't in years. Missed calls, texts, voicemails piling up faster than I could listen to them. And by the next day, there they were, standing on my front porch with smiles too wide and arms too open. Ashley stepping forward first, her voice suddenly warm. "Mom, why didn't you tell us sooner?" And she hugged me, held on a second longer than necessary, like she was trying to convince both of us it was real, and I hugged her back, just as gently, just as carefully, because in that moment, I wasn't thinking about the years of silence or the empty holidays. I was thinking about what came next, about the questions that hadn't been asked yet, about the truth that hadn't been revealed, and most of all, about how long they would stay once they realized there was no $10 million waiting for them at the end of this visit. They did not leave that day, not quickly, not like people who had just stopped by to say hello. They stayed, lingered, moved through the house as if they were rediscovering something they had forgotten existed. And I watched it all from my usual chair by the window, the same place I had sat on countless quiet afternoons, except now the silence had been replaced with voices that felt unfamiliar in my own home. Ashley was the first to step into the kitchen, opening cabinets she had not touched in years, commenting on how organized everything was, how cozy the house felt, her tone light, but her eyes constantly scanning, measuring, calculating, while David followed behind her, asking Robert about the lawn, the repairs, the small things that suddenly seemed important to him, things he had never once asked about before, not in the past 5 years, not even once. I noticed how quickly the conversation shifted, how every question eventually circled back to the same place, the same quiet center, the money. They never asked directly at first. They were careful, almost polite about it. Ashley mentioning financial advisors she had read about, David bringing up stories of people who had lost everything because they did not plan properly, their voices filled with concern that felt practiced, rehearsed, as if they had discussed this on the drive over. I poured coffee for everyone, the same way I always had, steady hands, measured movements, and I listened, really listened, not just to what they said but to what they avoided saying, to the pauses, to the glances they exchanged when they thought I was not looking, and it became clearer with every passing minute that this was not about reconnecting, not about missed holidays or forgotten birthdays. This was about something else entirely, something that had nothing to do with love. Later that evening, Ashley sat beside me on the couch, closer than she had ever been, her voice soft, almost gentle, asking if I had thought about what I would do next, how life-changing this kind of money could be, how important it was to make smart decisions. She placed her hand lightly over mine, a gesture that might have felt comforting years ago, but now felt foreign, like a performance, and I nodded slowly, as if I had not already considered every possible outcome, as if this was all new to me, while inside, I felt that same quiet certainty growing stronger, the kind that does not rush, does not shout, just settles in and waits. Across the room, Robert met my eyes for a brief moment, and we did not need to say anything, because we both understood what we were seeing unfold right in front of us. The sudden warmth, the careful questions, the way our presence had become important again overnight. And I realized then that this was only the beginning, that the real truth had not come out yet, not fully, and that all we had to do was wait a little longer, just long enough for them to forget they were being watched. The next morning began earlier than usual, not because I could not sleep, but because the house no longer felt like it belonged only to Robert and me. There were footsteps in the hallway, cabinets opening and closing, the quiet rhythm we had grown used to replaced by something restless, something expectant. And when I stepped into the kitchen, Ashley was already there, dressed neatly as if she had somewhere important to be, her phone in one hand, a notebook in the other, smiling when she saw me, but not quite reaching her eyes. "Good morning, Mom. I was just thinking we could sit down later and talk about everything. You know, make a plan," she said, her tone careful, measured, like someone walking across thin ice. And I simply nodded, pouring myself a cup of coffee, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make her feel it. David joined us a few minutes later, unusually attentive, asking if I needed anything from the store, if there were repairs around the house, if I had considered upgrading anything. Things he had never asked before, not when the roof leaked last winter, not when the heater broke down in the middle of January, back when the temperature dropped below 30 degrees and Robert and I sat wrapped in blankets, telling ourselves it would be fixed soon enough. Now suddenly, everything mattered to him. Every detail of this house he had once left behind without a second thought. We sat at the table together, all four of us, and for a moment, it almost looked like a family again. Almost, until Ashley opened her notebook and placed it carefully between us, her pen tapping lightly against the page as she spoke. "I just think it would be smart to organize things early. Protect what you have. There are a lot of people out there who take advantage of situations like this." And I watched her as she spoke, the way her voice stayed calm, but her eyes sharpened with each word, the way David nodded beside her, agreeing before I had even responded, as if they had already decided what the right answer should be. Robert leaned back in his chair, saying very little, letting me lead the conversation the way I always had, and I appreciated that, because this was not about confrontation, not yet. This was about understanding just how far they were willing to go. I asked simple questions, the kind that sound innocent but carry weight. "What kind of plan do you think we need?" And Ashley did not hesitate, not even for a second. She spoke about accounts, about transferring assets, about making sure everything was in the right hands. Her words carefully chosen, but her meaning unmistakable. And when she finally paused, looking at me expectantly, I smiled. The same gentle smile I had worn for years, the one that had once meant trust, but now meant something else entirely, something quieter, something sharper, because in that moment, I realized they were no longer pretending as carefully as they had the day before. The questions were coming faster, the concern less subtle, and all I had to do was keep listening. Just a little longer, because people reveal the truth not when they are questioned, but when they believe they are already in control. That afternoon, the air inside the house felt different, heavier somehow, like everything unsaid was starting to gather between us. And Ashley wasted no time pushing things further. She suggested we all sit down again, this time in the living room, her notebook already opened before anyone had even agreed, her pen poised as if she were leading a meeting instead of visiting family, and David sat beside her, quieter now, but just as invested, his eyes moving between her notes and my face, waiting, measuring, calculating in his own way. Robert remained in his chair near the window, silent but present, his gaze steady, and I could feel the weight of his trust in me, the understanding that this moment was mine to navigate. Ashley began speaking in a tone that sounded rehearsed, outlining ideas about consolidating accounts, setting up new ones, ensuring everything would be safe and efficient. Words that sounded responsible on the surface but carried a different meaning underneath, one that grew clearer with every sentence. And I let her speak without interruption, nodding occasionally, giving nothing away, because people like Ashley do not reveal everything at once. They build toward it, layer by layer, until they believe you are already convinced. Then she paused, just briefly, and said, "Of course, it would make things easier if David helped manage everything, at least at the beginning." And there it was, not hidden anymore, not softened, just placed carefully in front of me as if it were the most natural suggestion in the world. And I turned my eyes to David, who did not look surprised, did not question it, only nodded slightly as if this had already been decided long before they arrived. I asked him, gently, "Do you think that is necessary?" And he hesitated, just for a moment, before answering. "It is just to make sure everything is handled properly, Mom. You should not have to worry about these things." And his voice was calm, almost reassuring, but there was something missing from it, something that used to be there when he spoke to me, something that could not be replaced with careful words or polite concern. I leaned back slightly, letting the silence stretch again, because silence has a way of making people uncomfortable, and uncomfortable people tend to say more than they intend, and Ashley did exactly that, filling the space quickly, explaining how complicated finances could become, how easy it was to make mistakes, how important it was to trust the right people. And as she spoke, I noticed the small things, the way her fingers tightened around her pen, the way her voice sharpened when she talked about control, about access, about responsibility, and it was no longer subtle, no longer something I had to interpret. It was all right there, unfolding in front of me. I smiled again, softly, as if I appreciated her concern, as if I had not already understood everything she was trying to secure for herself. And I said, "I will think about it." Simple words, neutral, giving them just enough to keep going, just enough to let them believe they were getting closer. And I could see the shift immediately, the relief in David's posture, the satisfaction in Ashley's eyes, and in that moment, I knew they were no longer holding back, because they believed the outcome was already within their reach, and that belief would make them careless, and all I had to do now was wait for that carelessness to reveal the final piece of truth. That evening, everything became easier for them, and that was exactly what I had been waiting for, because once people believe they have already won, they stop hiding who they are, they relax, they speak more freely, and Ashley did not even bother with careful wording anymore. She moved through the house like it was already hers, opening drawers, asking where certain documents were kept, suggesting small improvements that sounded less like ideas and more like decisions already made, while David followed her, led without hesitation, agreeing with everything she said, reinforcing every suggestion as if it were for my own good. I stood in the kitchen preparing dinner, listening to their voices drift in from the living room, and for the first time, I did not feel hurt by what I heard, not in the way I used to, because something inside me had shifted, something quiet but steady, and it allowed me to see them clearly, not as the family I remembered, but as the people they had become. When we sat down to eat, Ashley brought up the topic again, this time more directly, mentioning how it would be wise to move funds into a joint account temporarily, just until everything was organized, her tone confident now, almost assured, as if she expected no resistance, and David nodded, adding that it would make things simpler for everyone, especially for me, repeating that word again, simpler, as if simplicity required handing over control. I placed my fork down gently and looked at them both, letting the silence stretch just enough to make them lean in slightly, waiting for my answer. And then I said something they were not expecting, not because it was complicated, but because it was too simple. I have been thinking about donating a large portion of it. And the reaction was immediate. Ashley's smile faltered for the briefest second, her pen stopped moving, and David's posture stiffened, his eyes narrowing just slightly as if trying to understand whether I was serious. I continued calmly, explaining that there were charities I had always wanted to support, causes that mattered, things I had never been able to contribute to before, and I spoke slowly, deliberately, giving them time to process each word, to react, to reveal themselves without realizing it. Ashley was the first to recover, her voice quick, a little too quick, pointing out how important it was to secure the family's future first, how decisions like that should be made carefully, together, her words still polite, but now carrying a sharp edge that had not been there before, and David agreed again, more firmly this time, emphasizing responsibility, practicality, the need to prioritize. But what they were really saying was clear, even without the words. This money was already theirs in their minds, already assigned, already planned. I nodded slowly, as if considering their concerns, as if their opinions carried weight, and I said, of course, I would not rush into anything. And I watched the tension ease from their shoulders, watched the relief settle in, and in that moment, I knew exactly what I needed to know. Because when the idea of giving the money away had unsettled them more than the idea of losing me ever had, it told me everything about where I truly stood in their lives, and more importantly, where I no longer needed to remain. The house grew quieter that night, but it was not the same quiet Robert and I had known before. It was heavier, filled with unspoken expectations, with plans forming behind polite smiles, and I could feel it in the way Ashley moved more confidently now, no longer asking where things were, but assuming she already had the right to know, opening drawers in the study, glancing at folders on the desk, her curiosity no longer disguised as casual interest, while David spent more time on his phone, stepping outside for calls he did not explain, his voice low but urgent, as if he were already discussing something that had not yet been agreed upon. I said nothing, not when Ashley asked if we had a safe, not when David mentioned meeting with a financial advisor he trusted, not even when they began talking about timelines, about how soon certain decisions should be made. Because silence, I had learned, was far more revealing than confrontation. It allowed people to fill the space with their true intentions, and they did, more quickly than I expected. The next morning, Ashley approached me with a document already prepared, printed neatly, her expression composed but her eyes bright with anticipation, and she explained that it was just a temporary arrangement, something simple to make things easier, a way for David to help manage the funds until everything was settled. Her words smooth, practiced, leaving no room for doubt about what she wanted, and I took the paper from her, holding it carefully, not because I needed to read it, but because I wanted her to believe that I might. I glanced over the lines slowly, letting the moment stretch, feeling her watching me, waiting for a reaction, waiting for agreement, and I asked a single question, quietly. Why does this need to be done so quickly? And for the first time since they arrived, she hesitated, just slightly, her answer coming a little too fast, a little too rehearsed, about market conditions, about security, about acting before it was too late, but none of it felt real, not in the way truth feels when it is spoken without urgency. David stepped in then, his voice firmer than before, saying that it was only to protect me, that they were trying to help, that I should trust them. And that word, trust, lingered in the air longer than anything else he had said, because trust is not something that returns overnight, not after years of silence, not after being forgotten until something valuable appears. I placed the document down gently on the table and smiled, the same calm, measured smile I had worn from the beginning, and I said, I will need more time. And the shift was immediate, subtle but unmistakable. Ashley's expression tightened, just for a second, her patience thinning beneath the surface, while David exhaled slowly, as if holding back frustration he did not want to show. And in that moment, I understood that they were no longer simply hoping, they were expecting, and expectation, when unmet, has a way of revealing everything people try to hide. I picked up my cup of coffee and took a small sip, steady, unhurried, as if nothing had changed. But inside, everything had become clear, because they were no longer waiting for permission, they were waiting for control, and that difference was the final piece I needed to see before deciding exactly what would happen next. By the third day, the house no longer felt like a place of reunion. It felt like a place of negotiation, and the difference was impossible to ignore, even in the smallest details. The way Ashley no longer asked before using things, the way David spoke as if decisions were already in motion, as if time itself was working in their favor, and I let it continue, not because I agreed, but because I needed to see how far they would go without resistance. That morning, I decided to give them one final test, not a confrontation, not an argument, just a simple shift in direction, and I chose my moment carefully, waiting until we were all together again at the table. The same table that had once held quiet dinners and empty chairs, now filled with voices that felt louder than they needed to be. I set my cup down gently and said, "I have made a decision," and the room stilled instantly, both of them looking at me with the same expectation, the same quiet anticipation, as if this was the moment everything would finally fall into place for them. And I continued, calm and steady. "I am going to donate most of it, not all, but enough to make a real difference." And this time, I did not soften the words. I did not leave room for interpretation. I let them land exactly as they were. Ashley's reaction came first, sharper than before, her voice rising just slightly as she tried to maintain composure, asking if I had really thought it through, reminding me of responsibilities, of family, of what that money could mean for the future. But her concern no longer sounded like care. It sounded like resistance, like something slipping out of her control. David followed, more direct now, no longer hiding behind careful phrasing, telling me that it did not make sense, that I was being impulsive, that decisions like this required guidance. And there it was again, that word without being spoken, control, wrapped in concern, presented as help. I listened without interrupting, letting their voices overlap, letting the urgency build, because urgency reveals truth faster than anything else. And when they finally paused, waiting for me to respond, I looked at them both, really looked at them. And for the first time since they arrived, I did not see hesitation. I did not see patience. I saw frustration, entitlement, something raw and unfiltered that had been building beneath the surface. I nodded slowly, as if considering their words, and said, "I understand your concerns," and I meant it, not in the way they expected, but in the way that comes from finally seeing something clearly. And then I added, "That is why I wanted to tell you before I made it official." And the shift was immediate, not relief, not acceptance, but something closer to urgency, as if they believed there was still time to change my mind, still time to redirect the outcome. Ashley leaned forward, her voice softer again, but no longer warm, asking if we could review everything together, if we could go over the numbers, if we could take one more step before finalizing anything. And David agreed quickly, his tone firm, almost insistent, and I realized then that they were not asking anymore. They were trying to regain ground they felt slipping away, and that effort, that sudden need to intervene, was the clearest answer I could have asked for, because it confirmed what I had known all along, that their presence here was never about us. It was about what they believed we had, and more importantly, what they believed they were entitled to receive. The room did not feel the same after that conversation. Something had shifted too far to be undone with polite words or careful smiles. And I could see it in the way Ashley moved now, no longer pretending to be patient, no longer masking her urgency with gentle concern. She stayed close, always within reach, always ready to bring the conversation back to the same point: the money, the decisions, the control. While David grew quieter but heavier in presence, his silence no longer neutral but filled with expectation, as if he believed I owed him something I had not yet given. That evening, I decided it was time, not for confrontation, not for anger, but for clarity, the kind that does not need to be raised in volume to be heard. And I chose a moment when we were all together again, the same four people, the same house, but nothing about it felt familiar anymore. I stood by the table, my hands resting lightly against the surface, steady, calm, and I said, "There is something I need to tell you." And both of them looked up immediately, their attention sharp, focused, ready, as if this was the moment they had been waiting for since they walked through the door. And I held that silence for just a second longer, letting it settle, letting them lean into it, before I continued. "There is no $10 million. And the words did not echo. They did not need to, because the impact was immediate, visible in the way Ashley's expression froze, her smile disappearing without warning, her eyes searching my face as if trying to find the part that was not serious, the part that would turn this into a misunderstanding. And David blinked once, slowly, as if he had not heard me correctly, as if the sentence needed to be repeated to make sense. I did not repeat it. I simply stood there, letting the truth exist in the space between us, unsoftened, unchanged, and Ashley was the first to speak, her voice no longer careful, no longer controlled, asking what I meant, why I would say something like that, why I would let them believe it. and her words came faster now, sharper, no longer concerned with how they sounded, only with what they demanded, while David's voice followed, lower but just as tense, asking if this was some kind of misunderstanding, if there had been a mistake, and I shook my head gently, once, because there was no mistake, not anymore. I told them simply, without detail, without explanation, that we had never won anything, that there was no account, no transfer, no sudden change in our lives except for the one they had created by coming back, and the silence that followed was not the same as before. It was not filled with expectation. It was filled with something else, something heavier, something closer to realization, and I watched as it settled over them. As the weight of it became clear, not just the absence of money, but the presence of something they could not undo, something they had already revealed without knowing it. And in that moment, I understood that the truth had not taken anything away from them. It had simply shown them exactly what they had come here for, and what they were now leaving without. For a long moment, no one moved, no one spoke, and the house felt as still as it had on those quiet nights when it was only Robert and me. Except this silence carried something heavier, something that could not be undone with apologies or explanations, and I watched them carefully, not with anger, not with satisfaction, just with clarity, because that was all that was left now. Ashley was the first to break, her voice sharper than I had ever heard it, asking why we would do something like this, why we would lie, her words coming fast, layered with disbelief, but also something else, something closer to frustration than hurt. And David followed, his tone lower but no less tense, saying that this was not right, that they had rushed here, that they had rearranged their lives to come see us. And I listened to every word without interrupting, because each one only confirmed what had already been shown, that their anger was not about the years we had spent alone, not about the calls that never came, not about the empty holidays. It was about something they thought they had lost. I let the silence return once more, just long enough for their voices to fade, and then I spoke, calmly, evenly. You came because you thought we had something you needed, and neither of them answered, not directly, but the absence of denial said more than anything they could have offered, and I continued, not raising my voice, not accusing, just stating what had become undeniable. We wanted to see if you would come for us, and I paused, letting that settle, letting them hear the difference. You did not. And that was the moment everything truly shifted, because there was nothing left to argue, nothing left to defend, only the truth standing quietly between us. Ashley looked away. First, her posture stiff, her expression closed off, while David remained where he was, his eyes on the floor now, as if something in him had finally caught up with what had happened, and I felt no need to press further, no need to demand anything from them, because the answers had already been given, not in words, but in actions, in timing, in the simple fact that it had taken the promise of money to bring them back through that door. Robert stood then, slowly, coming to my side without a word. And that was enough, more than enough, a quiet confirmation that we were done with questions, done with waiting. And I looked at them both one last time, not as the people I had once hoped they would be, but as the people they had shown themselves to be, and I said, you should go home. Not harshly, not angrily, just as a simple statement of what needed to happen next, and they did not argue, not really, because there was nothing left to hold on to here, nothing left that belonged to them. And as they gathered their things, moving through the house with a different kind of silence now, I realized something I had not expected, that the emptiness they left behind did not feel the same as before. It was no longer heavy, no longer filled with waiting. It was quiet in a way that felt clear, settled, and when the door finally closed, I stood there for a moment, listening to that silence, understanding it in a way I had not before, because this time, it was not something I was hoping would be broken. It was something I had chosen, and for the first time in a very long while, it felt like enough.